The Hells Angels biker found the little girl reading a stained note behind a heater, and its words exposed a hidden crime. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into the story. It was a quiet night, with only the sound of the wind howling outside the old house. The streets were empty. The world seemed to be asleep, but inside that dimly lit room, a secret was about to unfold. The Hells Angels biker, known as Reaper, stood at the door of the abandoned house, his eyes scanning the area. He had been riding all day, the wind against his leather jacket, and his mind lost in thought. But something about this place didn't sit right. He had come here looking for shelter from the rain, but what he found was something far darker. As Reaper stepped inside, the scent of dust and old wood filled his nose. The house was old, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots as he moved through the narrow hallway. He was just about to turn around and leave when he heard a sound. It was faint, but unmistakable, like the rustling of paper. His eyes narrowed as he followed the sound, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun holstered at his side. The noise led him to the corner of the room, where he saw a small figure huddled by the heater, her face hidden behind a stack of old books. She was a little girl, no older than 7 or 8. Her hands trembled as she held a small, stained note, her eyes wide with fear. The note was old, the edges curled and yellowed with age. But it wasn't just the note that caught Reaper's attention. It was the look in her eyes. Fear. Desperation. It was the look of someone who had seen too much for her young age. Reaper crouched down in front of her, his voice soft but firm. "Hey there, kid. Are you okay?" The girl didn't answer at first. She just clutched the note tighter, as if it were her lifeline. Reaper's heart tightened. He had seen this kind of fear before. He had been the one to instill it in others, back in the days when he wore the patch with pride. But now, standing here in front of this little girl, he felt something shift inside him. Something he hadn't felt in years. The girl finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Please, don't hurt me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the wind outside. Reaper's chest tightened. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but it wasn't this. He reached out, his hand gently resting on her shoulder, trying to offer some kind of comfort. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice low and soothing. "But I need you to tell me what's going on. What's in that note?" The girl hesitated, glancing nervously at the door, as if she expected someone to come in at any moment. Slowly, she opened the note, revealing a series of scrawled words that made Reaper's blood run cold. The words on the note were a warning, one that exposed a hidden crime, something far darker than anything Reaper had ever imagined. As he read the words, his mind raced. He had to act. He had to protect this little girl. And he had to make sure the people responsible for this crime never saw the light of day again. But first, he needed to get her out of here. Quickly and quietly, he gently helped the girl to her feet, his mind already working on a plan. He knew this place was not safe. And if the people behind this note found out he had discovered their secret, there would be hell to pay. But that was a risk Reaper was willing to take. For now, he had to get the girl to safety. The note's words still echoed in his mind, but there was no time to think about them. He had a child to protect, and nothing was going to stop him from doing that. I could feel the weight of the little girl's gaze on me as I carefully helped her up from the cold floor. Her small hand gripped mine tightly, trembling as if she thought I would disappear the moment she let go. The room around us was dimly lit, with shadows stretching long across the walls, but there was no time to focus on the haunting silence or the dusty air that seemed to hang heavy with secrets. I could feel the pulse of urgency in my veins as I scanned the room one last time, making sure no one was watching. The note was still clenched tightly in her hand, the words on it burning in my mind. A hidden crime. Something much worse than what any child should ever know. As I gently led her toward the door, my mind raced. Who could be behind this? Who would threaten a little girl like this? And why? I didn't have answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Whoever was responsible for this was about to face the consequences. But first, I needed to get the girl out of there. "Stay close to me," I whispered as we moved toward the door. The rain outside was coming down harder now, the sound of it pattering against the roof like 1,000 tiny hammers. The storm was growing more intense, and I knew that made it harder for anyone to track us, but also meant more danger if we stayed too long. I kept my eyes on the street as we stepped out, the sound of the Harley-Davidson engine roaring to life as I started the bike. The cold night air hit me hard, but I didn't flinch. My focus was entirely on the girl now. She climbed onto the bike behind me, holding on tightly as we sped down the empty streets. The wind whipped through my hair, but all I could think about was her. I couldn't let her be hurt again. Not like this. She had already been through enough. "What's your name, kid?" I asked, trying to break the silence between us. Her voice was barely audible over the sound of the engine, but I caught it. "Maggie," she whispered. "Maggie, where are your parents?" She hesitated for a moment, her small body stiffening against my back, before she spoke again. They're not around." Her words were flat, devoid of emotion, but I could hear the sadness in them. She didn't need to say more. I knew what it meant. No child should have to live like this. I knew that now more than ever. "Don't worry," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You're safe with me now. I'll make sure nothing happens to you." We rode in silence for a while, the streetlights flickering as we passed. My mind kept running through the possibilities. Who could have left Maggie alone like this? Why had she been hiding that note? What was it about the words she had read that had shaken her so deeply? I could feel the weight of those questions pressing on me, but I couldn't let them distract me. We were on our way to my garage, the one place I could think of where we'd be safe for now. The world outside was filled with danger, and I knew I wasn't the only one who knew what I had just discovered. As we pulled into the parking lot, I quickly parked the bike and led Maggie inside. The dim light from a single overhead bulb illuminated the cold concrete floor as I closed the door behind us. The garage smelled like oil and metal, a familiar scent, one that brought back memories of better days. I turned to Maggie, my heart aching for her. She looked so small standing there in the shadows, her eyes wide with fear. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, but I knew better. The truth was, things were about to get worse before they got better. "Stay here," I told her, my voice low. "I need to make a few calls." She nodded, clutching her jacket tighter around her small frame as she watched me leave. As I walked toward the back office, my mind was already working. Who could be behind this? I had a feeling that Maggie's parents weren't the only ones who had been hiding secrets. Someone had been pulling strings behind the scenes, and I was going to find out who. But for now, I needed to keep Maggie safe. I knew the risks. I had faced them before. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for her, and I would do whatever it took to make sure she was safe. I stood in the back office of the garage, my eyes scanning the old phone book and the scattered paperwork on the desk. The whirring of the overhead fan was the only sound in the room, a faint hum that seemed to underscore the growing tension in the air. Maggie was still sitting in the main area, her small figure barely visible in the low light. I hadn't wanted to leave her alone, but I needed to get some answers. The note, the words. Whoever was behind this was still out there, and I needed to make sure I was prepared for what was coming. My mind raced through the possibilities. Who would hurt a little girl like her? Who would leave her with such a heavy burden to carry? The words on the note were clear, but they didn't give me enough information. I had to find out more. I picked up the burner phone from the desk and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Yeah." The voice was low, rough, and edged with suspicion. "It's Reaper," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "I need your help." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could feel the hesitation, but then the voice spoke again. "What's this about? You know I don't get involved in your kind of mess." I sighed, glancing over at Maggie. She was still staring at the ground, lost in her thoughts, but I knew I had to press forward. "It's about a kid. She's in trouble, and I need to know who's behind it." The line went quiet for a moment, and then the voice spoke again, this time with a hint of curiosity. "A kid? Who is she?" "Doesn't matter who she is," I said, trying to keep my voice low. "What matters is what she's seen. I think there's something bigger going on here, and I need to know who I'm dealing with." There was another pause, but I could tell the wheels were turning on the other end. Finally, the voice replied, "I'll look into it. But you're on your own. Don't expect any favors." The line went dead, and I put the phone down with a heavy sigh. I knew I had to trust this guy, even if I didn't like it. He owed me a favor, but I wasn't sure how far that favor would go. Still, I had no choice but to wait and hope that he could find something useful. Turning away from the desk, I walked back into the main area of the garage. Maggie was still sitting there, her hands in her lap, her eyes downcast. She looked so small in that chair, like she didn't belong in this world. I knew I had to protect her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. I sat down next to her, trying to offer a comforting smile. "You doing okay?" I asked, my voice soft. She nodded, but there was something about the way she looked at me that made me uneasy. Her eyes were filled with something darker now, something I hadn't seen before. Fear, but not the kind of fear that comes from being scared. This was something deeper, something that made my heart ache for her. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know," I said, my hand resting gently on her shoulder. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you." Maggie looked up at me, her eyes searching mine, as if she was looking for reassurance. "What about the people who are after me? What if they come for me?" Her question hit me like a punch in the gut. I had no easy answer for her. I couldn't promise that everything would be okay. All I could do was keep her safe as long as I could. "I'll protect you," I said firmly, even though part of me was already doubting whether that would be enough. There was something bigger at play here, something I couldn't yet see. And I knew that protecting Maggie wouldn't be as simple as keeping her inside the garage. The people behind this were out there, and they were looking for her. I stood up, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. "Stay here," I told Maggie. "I need to check something outside." She nodded, but her eyes never left me. As I stepped outside into the cold night air, I felt the weight of the world pressing down on me. The streets were empty, the only sound the crunch of gravel under my boots. I walked around the back of the garage, checking the perimeter, making sure no one was lurking nearby. My mind was still racing, trying to piece together the puzzle of what was happening. I knew one thing for sure. The people behind this weren't just ordinary criminals. They were organized. They had a plan, and I had no idea how deep this went. As I walked back into the garage, I could feel my determination hardening. I wasn't going to let anyone hurt Maggie. No matter what it took, I was going to find out who was behind this and make them pay. Maggie's life depended on it. I stood in the cold night air, the sounds of the garage fading behind me as I walked toward the back of the building. My mind was still racing with questions, but I couldn't afford to get lost in the unknown. Maggie's safety depended on me staying focused. The wind cut through my jacket, but I didn't feel it. Every instinct told me that something was off. I had been through my share of dangerous situations, but none of them had ever felt like this. Whoever was behind this, they weren't just after Maggie. They were after something bigger. As I rounded the corner, I checked the alley again, my eyes scanning for anything unusual. The streetlights were dim, casting long shadows that made it difficult to see clearly. It was the perfect environment for someone to be lurking, waiting for the right moment. My hand instinctively went to my belt, where I kept my knife. It wasn't the first time I'd had to defend myself, but this felt different. This time, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for Maggie. I had to make sure she was safe, even if it meant going to extremes. I turned back and headed inside, taking one last look at the empty parking lot before I stepped through the door. Maggie was still in the same spot, sitting quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked small in the big garage, as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders. I could see it in her eyes. She was trying to act brave, but I knew she was terrified. "Maggie," I said softly, walking over to her. "We need to talk." Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and for a moment, I could see the fear melting away. She trusted me, and that made all the difference. "What's going to happen now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I could see her shoulders shaking, despite her best efforts to stay calm. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that the worst was over. But I knew better than that. The worst had barely begun. "I don't know, kid," I said honestly, my voice rough. "But I'm not going to let anything happen to you. You're safe here for now, but we need to figure out what's going on. There's someone out there, someone who did this to you. And I'm going to find out who it is." Maggie looked down at the floor, her fingers twisting nervously. "I didn't mean to get anyone in trouble," she said softly, almost to herself. "I just found the note." I knelt down beside her, my hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said, trying to reassure her. "You were just trying to protect yourself, and that's not something to feel guilty about. We're going to get through this." I stood up and glanced around the garage. It was clear that we needed to get out of here soon. The longer we stayed, the more danger we were in. I walked over to the back office, trying to keep my movement steady, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. It was too quiet, too still. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number again, waiting for the line to pick up. The voice on the other end was the same as before. "What do you have for me?" I asked. There was a long pause, followed by a sigh. "You weren't wrong," the voice said. "There's something big going on here. The note you found, it's connected to something a lot bigger than just a missing kid." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I can't get into details yet, but trust me, it's bad. You're dealing with people who are used to covering their tracks. You need to be careful." "I'm always careful," I said, though I knew that wasn't entirely true. I'd made mistakes in the past, but this time, I wouldn't let that happen again. "What else do you know?" I asked, my mind already planning my next move. "Not much, but there's one thing that stands out. Whoever is behind this, they've been using kids like Maggie to hide their tracks. They're manipulating them. We think it's tied to a larger criminal network. It's been going on for years." The words hit me like a punch. To the gut. I had seen my fair share of criminals, but this was something else entirely. Maggie wasn't just a victim. She was a pawn in a game much larger than anything I had ever imagined. "I'm coming for them," I said through gritted teeth. "Whoever they are, I'm going to make sure they never hurt anyone again." I hung up the phone and turned to face Maggie, who had quietly entered the office behind me. She stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. I walked over to her and knelt down to her level. "Maggie," I said gently, "there's something going on, something bigger than we thought. But I need you to trust me. We're going to get through this together." She nodded, the fear still in her eyes, but there was a flicker of hope there too. It wasn't much, but it was enough. We had a long road ahead of us, but I wasn't about to let anyone stand in our way. Not now. Not ever. I stood in the dim light of the office, my eyes locked on Maggie's. She was still quiet, but I could tell she was processing everything. I had just learned that what I was dealing with was bigger than I had thought. It wasn't just a missing child or a simple case of abuse. No, this was a well-organized operation, one that used kids as tools for something far more sinister. The network I was about to dive into wasn't something any one person could take down alone, but that didn't matter right now. I had made a promise to Maggie, and I was going to keep it. I stepped over to the desk and grabbed my jacket, pulling it on over my shoulders. My mind was focused, my thoughts racing through every possible scenario. I had to protect her. I had to find out who was behind all of this. I walked back over to Maggie, crouching down to her level. Her wide eyes looked up at me, searching for reassurance. I wasn't sure if I had all the answers, but I knew that I wasn't going to stop until this was all over. "Maggie," I said softly, "I'm going to need you to stay here for a little while longer. I have to go find out what's going on, but I promise I'll be back." "For you." She nodded slowly, her face full of uncertainty, but I could see the trust she had in me. She hadn't spoken much, but I knew she was still scared. And I was scared for her, too. The world we were up against wasn't a place for kids. But I wasn't about to let anyone hurt her again. I made my way out of the office, heading toward the back door. I needed to get to the source of the problem, and the best place to start was where the note had come from. If Maggie had found it, someone had to be behind it. I wasn't sure what I would find, but I wasn't going to turn back now. As I walked through the back lot, my eyes scanned the area. The wind had picked up, the chill biting at my skin. I wasn't paying attention to the cold, though. My mind was focused on Maggie, on keeping her safe. She had been through enough. I could hear the hum of my motorcycle in the distance, and I made my way toward it, starting the engine. The roar of the Harley-Davidson cut through the silence of the night, the sound echoing through the empty streets. As I revved the engine, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. But I couldn't afford to let my guard down. Not now. Not when I was this close. I kicked the bike into gear and sped off into the night, heading toward the address I had found in the note. It was an abandoned building on the outskirts of town, one I had passed by 100 times but never thought much of. But now, it seemed like the key to everything. As I approached the building, I slowed down, trying to get a better look. The area was dark, with only the faint glow of the streetlights casting long shadows. The building was old, the windows boarded up, and the doors seemed like they hadn't been touched in years. It looked like the perfect place to hide something. I parked my bike a few hundred yards away and made my way toward the building, keeping low to the ground. My heart was racing, but I couldn't let the adrenaline get to me. This was too important. I had to be careful. I approached the side of the building, where I could see a small alleyway leading to the back. As I turned the corner, I saw a movement in the shadows. Someone was here. My pulse quickened, and I instinctively reached for the knife I kept tucked into my belt. But then I stopped. I couldn't act rashly. I needed information, not a fight. I moved quietly, keeping close to the wall as I approached the back of the building. I peered around the corner and saw a figure standing by the back door, speaking to someone in hushed tones. I couldn't make out the words, but the tension in their body was clear. They were talking about something important, something I needed to hear. I waited for the right moment, watching carefully. I knew I couldn't let them see me. If they knew I was here, the whole plan would fall apart. As they turned to leave, I moved quickly, slipping through the shadows and closer to the door. I was so close now, I could almost feel it. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for me to slip inside. I pushed it open slowly, making sure not to make a sound. The interior was dark, the only light coming from the flickering of a broken bulb overhead. I stepped inside, my boots barely making a sound on the concrete floor. As I moved deeper into the building, I could hear voices. There were people inside. I was getting closer to the truth, but I didn't know how close I was to danger. I moved down a hallway, the walls covered in dust and cobwebs, until I found a small room at the end. The door was cracked open, and I could see two figures inside, talking in low voices. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but one word caught my attention: Maggie. My heart skipped a beat. They were talking about her. They knew she had the note. They were looking for her, and they were willing to do whatever it took to get it back. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. I had to get back to the garage. I had to get Maggie out of there before they found her. I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, I heard footsteps. Someone was coming. I cursed under my breath and ducked into a small storage room, holding my breath. As the footsteps grew louder, I had to stay hidden. I had to stay alive. I held my breath as the footsteps grew closer, the soft creak of the floorboards echoing in the otherwise silent room. My heart was pounding in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had to stay still, keep quiet, and wait for the right moment. The faint light coming through the crack under the door barely illuminated the small storage room I was hiding in, and I could see the dust swirling in the air. The footsteps paused outside the door, and I could feel the tension in the air. Someone was close, very close. I pressed myself further back into the shadows, my body tense, my mind racing. My hand instinctively went to the knife at my side, but I knew I had to be careful. I couldn't afford to get caught. I couldn't let them find me now. I needed to know what they were planning, what they were saying. The door creaked open slightly, and I could hear the voices outside. One was gruff, deep, and the other was higher-pitched, nervous. I strained my ears, trying to make out the words. "She's here. I know it," the deep voice said. "The kid's got the note. We can't let her slip away again." I felt a chill run down my spine. They were talking about Maggie. They knew she had the note. They were looking for her. "What if she's already gone?" the other voice asked. "What if she's already out of the building?" "Then we'll find her," the first voice replied coldly. "She's the key. We can't let her go. We need that note." The words hit me like a punch. Whoever these people were, they were desperate. And they weren't just looking for Maggie. They were looking for something much bigger. I knew that note had to be more than just a message. It was a key to something they were trying to hide. Something dangerous. And I was determined to find out what it was. The footsteps started moving away from the door, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I waited a few moments to make sure they were gone, then carefully eased the door open. The hallway was empty, but I didn't let my guard down. I had to get back to Maggie. I had to get her out of here. I slipped back into the shadows, moving quickly and silently. The building was a maze of corridors and rooms, but I knew the layout well enough to navigate through it. The last thing I wanted was to run into one of those men again. I reached the back door, the one I had used to enter, and peeked outside. The alleyway was dark, the rain still falling heavily, and I could hear the distant sound of traffic. I glanced over my shoulder, making sure no one was following, and then I stepped outside. My motorcycle was parked a few yards away, the engine still cold. I started walking toward it, my steps quickening as I thought about Maggie. She had to be scared, alone in the garage. I had promised her I would protect her, and I was going to keep that promise, no matter what. As I approached the bike, I could hear a distant noise behind me. Footsteps, moving fast. I turned just in time to see a figure emerge from the shadows. A man, tall and imposing, with a face that was half shadowed by the hood of his jacket. I knew I couldn't outrun him. There was no time to fight. I had to think fast. I spun around, grabbing the handle of my bike and jumping on it in one smooth motion. The man was too close now. I revved the engine, kicking up gravel as I tore out of the alley. The sound of my Harley roared through the night, the wind hitting my face as I sped down the street. I looked over my shoulder, but the man had disappeared back into the darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still following me, that they weren't far behind. But I couldn't stop. Not now. I had to get back to Maggie. I made my way toward the garage, the engine of my bike growling beneath me. The streets were empty, the city quiet, but I knew that silence wouldn't last. I could feel the tension building, the weight of the danger pressing down on me. I had no idea what I was about to walk into, but I couldn't back down. I pulled into the parking lot of the garage, my bike screeching to a halt as I quickly dismounted. I rushed to the door, my heart racing. I pushed it open, the familiar scent of oil and metal hitting my nose. Maggie was still in the same spot, sitting quietly in the corner. Her eyes met mine, filled with fear and relief. I hurried over to her, my voice low. "We have to go now," I said urgently. "They know about the note. They're looking for you." She didn't hesitate. She stood up quickly, her small hand reaching for mine. We didn't speak as we rushed toward the back door. I had no idea what we were going to do next, but I knew we couldn't stay here any longer. As we stepped outside into the cold night, I could hear the faint sound of footsteps again, echoing in the distance. They were still coming, and this time, I wasn't sure if we were going to outrun them. I could feel the tension rising as Maggie and I sprinted through the alley, our footsteps echoing in the cold night air. My heart pounded in my chest, and every instinct told me to keep moving, to get out of there as fast as possible. But I couldn't shake the feeling that they were closing in on us. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a figure emerging from the shadows. The footsteps I had heard earlier? They weren't just in my head. Someone was definitely following us. I took Maggie's hand, and we turned a corner, ducking into another alleyway. The buildings around us were tall and narrow, the streets almost deserted at this hour. The city felt like a maze, and we were lost in the middle of it. But I knew one thing for sure. If we kept running, we'd find a way out. I looked around, trying to figure out our next move. The garage was behind us now, but I wasn't sure where to go from here. My bike was parked a few blocks away, but we couldn't just walk there. Not now. They'd find us. I spotted a narrow door at the end of the alley, hidden behind a dumpster. It looked like an old service entrance, the kind that nobody used anymore. I tugged at Maggie's hand, pulling her toward it. "Come on," I said, my voice low. "We need to get inside." Maggie nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't argue. She trusted me, and I couldn't let her down. I pushed the door open, and we stepped inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of a street lamp outside. I slammed the door behind us, making sure it was locked. We were safe for now, but I knew it wouldn't last long. They'd be looking for us, and I had no idea how long it would take before they found this place. I could hear Maggie's breath coming in short bursts, her small body trembling in the darkness. I crouched down in front of her, my eyes scanning the area. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice soft. She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She was scared, and so was I. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I had to keep it together for her. "We'll be fine," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. "Just stay here. I'll figure out what to do next." I turned to look around the room. It was small, just an old storage area with a few broken crates and boxes scattered around. But there was something else, something that caught my attention. On the far wall, I noticed a small door, barely visible in the shadows. It looked like it led to another part of the building. I stood up and walked toward it, my hand brushing against the cold metal of the door. It was locked, but that wasn't a problem. I had tools on me, always did. I pulled out a lockpick from my jacket pocket and started working on the door. It took a few seconds, but the lock clicked open, and the door creaked as it swung inward. I stepped into the next room, my senses on high alert. The air in here was musty, the faint scent of old wood and rust filling my nose. I could barely make out the shapes of old furniture, stacks of boxes, and crates piled high in the corner. But what caught my attention wasn't the room itself, it was the noise. I could hear voices coming from the far side of the room. Low, muffled, but unmistakable. Someone was here. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly backed up, closing the door behind me as quietly as I could. I motioned for Maggie to stay quiet. She nodded, her eyes wide with understanding. We needed to be careful. Whoever was in that room wasn't supposed to see us. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I needed to think. There was no way I could let Maggie get caught now. They were getting closer, and I could feel it in my gut. I crouched down beside her, my mind working through the next steps. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. The door to the storage area had been locked for a reason. There was something here, something they didn't want me to find. I had to figure out what it was. But before I could make a move, I heard it again, the sound of footsteps. Closer this time. Much closer. They were coming for us. My eyes scanned the room, looking for an escape. The room with the voices was just ahead, but I couldn't risk it. I grabbed Maggie's hand again and motioned for her to follow me. We needed to get out. The exit was only a few feet away, but we couldn't afford to be seen. I slowly moved toward the back of the room, trying to keep my movements silent. The footsteps grew louder, and I could hear the faint sound of breathing. Someone was just around the corner. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't hear us. My eyes darted to the door, and I felt the pressure mounting. We were so close, but I knew the danger was far from over. Whoever these people were, they weren't going to stop. And neither was I. I pulled Maggie into the shadowed corner, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps outside the room were growing closer, each one sounding like it could be the last. I needed to think, but the rush of adrenaline was clouding my judgment. They were closing in on us, and there was no way to escape without being seen. I could hear the voices again, muffled but unmistakable. It was like a bad dream, the kind where you know you can't wake up. We were trapped. I glanced at Maggie, her small hand clutching mine so tightly I could feel her tiny fingers trembling. Her face was pale, and her wide eyes were filled with fear. I hated seeing her like this. She shouldn't have to be caught up in this mess. She was just a kid, and yet here we were, hiding in the dark, hunted by people I didn't even fully understand. I squeezed her hand gently, trying to reassure her. Stay quiet. Just stay close. I whispered, my voice as steady as I could make it. I couldn't afford to let my fear show. I had promised to protect her, and I was damn sure going to keep that promise. I shifted my position, slowly moving toward the back of the room, my eyes never leaving the door. The footsteps outside were now almost right on top of us. Whoever it was, they weren't far. I was running out of time. My mind raced for options. There had to be another way out. I scanned the room again, looking for anything that could help us. The shadows seemed to press in on me, but then I saw it. A small window near the back wall, high up and just big enough for us to fit through. It was our only chance. I motioned for Maggie to follow me and began to move toward the window, taking slow, measured steps. We couldn't risk making any noise. My heart pounded louder than I would have liked to admit, but I couldn't stop now. If we didn't move fast, they'd be on us before we had a chance to react. I reached the window and tugged on the frame. It was stuck, but I didn't have time to mess around. I took a deep breath, my fingers pressing into the edges of the window, and gave it a hard push. The glass creaked, but didn't budge. I could hear the voices again. The door was about to open, and I could feel the tension in my muscles, coiled like a spring ready to snap. Come on, I muttered under my breath. With one last effort, I pulled the window hard, the sound of it finally giving way, filling the otherwise silent room. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I grabbed Maggie's arm and lifted her up, guiding her through the narrow opening. She was scared. I could see it in her eyes, but she didn't fight. She trusted me. Go. I'll be right behind you, I whispered. She hesitated for a moment, then crawled through the window, disappearing into the night. I took a deep breath, stepped up to the window, and pulled myself through. The cold night air hit me immediately, sharp and biting, but it was the only feeling I could focus on. I landed on the ground outside with a soft thud, crouching low to avoid being seen. The last thing I needed was for them to spot us now. I motioned for Maggie to follow me, and we started moving through the shadows, my mind still racing. We couldn't stop. We couldn't rest. I knew they were still looking for us, and I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of catching us. We moved quickly, staying close to the buildings and away from the open street. I kept one eye on Maggie, making sure she was still right behind me. We didn't speak as we moved through the alleys, every footstep a potential death sentence. but I couldn't afford to slow down. I had to get her to safety. I knew the building we were heading for, the old abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the safest place, but it would do for now. I had to keep moving, to keep ahead of whatever was chasing us. We finally reached the factory after what felt like hours, but it was really only a matter of minutes. I quickly unlocked the side door, glancing over my shoulder once more before we slipped inside. The door shut quietly behind us, and we were finally out of sight. For now, at least. Maggie was breathing heavily, her small body pressed against the cold wall. I knew she was exhausted, but we couldn't stop. Not yet. We were safe, but not for long. I had to figure out what was going on, who was behind this, and why they were so desperate to get their hands on that note. I turned to Maggie, my voice low and steady. We're safe here for now, but we need to stay hidden. Understand? She nodded, her eyes wide but filled with a sense of trust. I could see she was still scared, but she was strong. Stronger than she probably even knew. I couldn't let her down. Not now, not ever. I took one last look around the dark, abandoned factory, my mind already working through the next steps. The note was still out there. The people behind it were still after us. And I wasn't going to stop until I found out. Why? I glanced around the dark factory, the cold concrete walls standing like silent witnesses to whatever twisted game was being played here. Maggie was beside me, her small frame almost swallowed up by the shadows, her eyes wide with fear, yet full of trust. I had promised to keep her safe, and I would, no matter what it took. The place was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the wind as it howled outside. I could feel the weight of every second ticking by, knowing the people who were after us wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. The note, the one Maggie had found, was still the key. It was more than just a simple clue. It was a map, a trail leading to something far more dangerous. I had to figure out what it meant, but I couldn't do it alone. I had to get Maggie out of here first. Stay close. I murmured to her, my voice steady even though my mind was anything but. I had to keep my focus, had to make sure that whatever happened next, Maggie wouldn't be the one paying the price. I walked cautiously through the factory, my boots making barely a sound on the cracked, dirty floor. The place was a maze of rusted machinery, old crates, and broken windows. It was the perfect hideout, empty, forgotten, and hidden in plain sight. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that we weren't as alone as we thought. I could hear faint sounds, whispers almost, but when I turned to look, there was nothing. I reached the far end of the factory, where a set of stairs led to a second floor. The stairs creaked under my weight, and I held my breath, listening for any sign of movement from below. But there was nothing. I motioned for Maggie to follow, and she did, her footsteps light but cautious. We reached the second floor, and I immediately moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The streetlights below were faint, and the area around the factory was quiet, too quiet. There were no cars, no movement. It was as if the world outside had vanished, leaving us alone with the danger lurking in the shadows. I turned away from the window, my mind still working over the pieces of the puzzle. Who were these people? Why? Were they so desperate to get the note? I needed answers, and the only way to get them was to go deeper into the heart of this mess. But first, I needed to get Maggie somewhere safe. I couldn't risk her being caught in the crossfire. Maggie, stay here, I said, my voice low. I need to check something. She nodded silently, her eyes not leaving me. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of everything hanging heavy in the air. But there was no time to waste. I had to move. I left the room, creeping back down the stairs and toward the back of the factory. There had to be something I was missing, some clue, some hint that would tell me what was going on. I passed several rooms, each one more decrepit than the last, until I came to a small, locked door at the back of the building. The door was old, the wood cracked and worn, but it was sturdy. I pulled out my tools, quickly working the lock. It clicked open, and I pushed the door gently, careful not to make any noise. Inside, the room was dark, the air thick with dust. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A desk, piled high with papers, and on top of it, a small metal box. It was locked, but I knew I could break into it. I approached the desk, my hands steady as I worked on the box. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Finally, the lock gave way, and I opened the box. Inside, I found a series of photographs, each one more disturbing than the last. There were pictures of Maggie, some of them taken just days ago. But it wasn't just her, there were others. Other children, their faces obscured or turned away, their eyes filled with the same fear that Maggie had in hers. These weren't just random photos. These were the same people behind this, and they had been watching us. I felt a cold fury rise in me as I sifted through the pictures. Whoever these people were, they weren't just after the note. They were after the kids, after Maggie and others like her. I closed the box, my hands shaking, and stood up, a new determination filling my veins. I couldn't let them get away with this. I had to find out who they were and stop them before it was too late. I heard a sound behind me, and I whipped around, my hand instinctively going to the knife at my side. But it was only Maggie, her face pale with worry. "What's wrong?" she whispered. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "We need to go," I said, my voice firm. "It's not safe here anymore." Maggie nodded, fear still in her eyes. But there was something else too, a glimmer of trust. We didn't say anything as we made our way back to the stairs, but the tension in the air was palpable. The danger was real, and it was closing in on us. But I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. I could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on me as I led Maggie back through the dark, creaky hallways of the factory. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could hear the faint sound of my breath as I focused on the next steps. We had to move fast, but every instinct told me that the worst was still to come. The pictures I had found were like a punch to the gut. The kids in those photographs, they weren't just faces in the crowd. They were part of something twisted, something that went far beyond what I had imagined. The people after Maggie weren't just interested in a note. They were in the business of using children. My blood ran cold thinking about it, and I knew now, more than ever, that I had to get Maggie out of here. But we couldn't run forever. I had to figure out who was behind this, and why. I couldn't let them use Maggie like they had used the others. I glanced over at her, her small hand still tightly gripping mine. Her face was pale, but her eyes, those eyes, there was something else there now. A quiet strength, even though she was scared. I had to give her credit. She was holding up better than I thought. We reached the back door of the factory, the one I had hoped would give us a way out. I paused, listening. The sound of footsteps outside caught my attention, and I froze. They were getting closer, but this time, I didn't panic. I had to stay calm. I motioned for Maggie to stay quiet, and we crouched low to the ground, hidden in the shadows of the doorway. The footsteps grew louder, and I could hear voices. They were searching for us, but they didn't know we were right here. I stayed still, barely breathing, praying they wouldn't spot us. "Where are they?" One voice said, low and gruff. "We'll find them. Just a matter of time." I could feel the cold sweat running down my back. This wasn't just a couple of guys looking for a lost note. This was something much worse. Whoever they were hunting us down, and it was only a matter of time before they realized where we were hiding. "They can't be far," another voice said. "Check the back alley again." My grip on Maggie's hand tightened, and I could feel her trembling beside me. I knew I couldn't keep her here much longer. The factory was too exposed. We had to get to the bike, to the next safe spot, but it wasn't going to be easy. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I knew we had one shot at this. I motioned for Maggie to follow me, and we slipped through the back door, careful not to make a sound. The night air hit me like a slap in the face, cold and biting. I didn't hesitate. We had to get to the bike, and fast. I led Maggie through the back lot of the factory, keeping low and moving quickly. I could hear the sounds of the searchers still out there, but they were a distance away, and I didn't intend to let them get any closer. We rounded the corner of the building and headed for the motorcycle, parked just out of sight. My heart raced as I reached the bike, but just as I was about to mount it, I heard the sound of footsteps again, much closer this time. I cursed under my breath. They were on our tail. We didn't have much time. "Maggie, get on the bike now," I said urgently, my voice low but firm. She didn't hesitate. She climbed onto the bike behind me, her small hands gripping me tightly as I fired up the engine. The roar of the Harley echoed through the night, a sound of freedom and danger all at once. I could feel Maggie pressing against my back as we took off down the alley, weaving through the narrow streets. My focus was sharp, the engine growling beneath me as I sped through the empty roads. The city was dark, but I knew where I was going. I had a place, a safe house, one of the few I could trust, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still following us. The road ahead seemed endless, but I had to stay one step ahead. Maggie's grip on me tightened, and I could feel her body shaking against mine. "We're going to be okay," I said, trying to calm her, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. "Just hold on. We're almost there." But I knew we weren't safe yet. The people after us wouldn't stop. They were relentless, and I had no idea how far this went. I had to find out, though. For Maggie's sake, for the other kids, and for my own sanity. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but all I could see was the endless stretch of empty street behind us. I had to keep moving. As we reached the outskirts of the city, I turned onto a smaller road, the one that led to the safe house. It wasn't much, but it was hidden, and that was all that mattered. I slowed the bike as I approached the gate, making sure no one was in sight. Once inside, I parked the bike and quickly dismounted, helping Maggie off. "Stay close," I said. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we're safer here for now." Maggie nodded, her eyes wide but filled with that quiet strength I had come to admire. I led her inside, locking the door behind us. The safe house was small, but it had everything we needed. I looked around, making sure the place was secure before I let myself relax. For the first time in hours, I allowed myself a breath. We were safe, but only for now. I sat in the dimly lit room of the safe house, the only sound the faint hum of the fridge and the steady beat of my heart. Maggie was sitting across from me, her eyes tired but alert, the weight of everything that had happened over the past hours heavy on her small shoulders. She didn't say anything, just stared at the floor, lost in her thoughts. I knew she was scared. Hell, I was scared too. The night had been a whirlwind of running, hiding, and uncertainty. We had barely managed to escape the factory, but that was only the beginning. I had no doubt that the people after us weren't going to give up easily. The note, the photographs, everything pointed to something much bigger than I had initially realized. They weren't just after the kid with the note. They were after the whole operation. The thought of Maggie being used like that, like the others in the photos, made my stomach churn. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not on my watch. But I couldn't stop now. I had to figure out what was going on. I had to find out who was behind all this. I stood up from the chair, walking over to the small table where I had left my phone. I needed to make another call. There were too many unanswered questions. Too many pieces of the puzzle missing. I dialed the number I had used before, the one that had given me the first bit of information. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "What's the word?" the voice asked, low and steady. "I need answers," I said, my voice tight. "You said this was bigger than I thought. What the hell is going on?" There was a long pause, and I could hear the voice on the other end take a deep breath. "It's not good," the voice finally replied. "What you're dealing with here, it's a network. A criminal organization that's been using kids for years. They've been operating under the radar, pulling strings from behind the scenes. And they've been doing it for a long time." My mind raced, my thoughts scrambling to make sense of it all. A criminal network? Kids as pawns in some twisted game? I couldn't wrap my head around it. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who's behind this?" The voice paused again, and I could almost feel the weight of the words hanging in the air. "They're a lot bigger than you think. They've got connections, power. This goes deep. But I'll tell you this, they're ruthless. And they won't stop until they get what they want." My chest tightened. Ruthless. That word had a weight too. I had seen my fair share of violence, but this was something else entirely. "What do you mean get what they want?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "What's their endgame?" "I don't know for sure," the voice replied, the tension in their tone unmistakable. "But I think it's tied to the kid. Maggie. They're using her. They've been using other kids like her, too. The note she has, there's more to it than just a message. It's a key to something they've been hiding for years. And if they think you're close to figuring it out, they're going to come for you. And they'll come for Maggie." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had to get to Maggie. I had to protect her. This wasn't just about a missing note anymore. This was about something far more dangerous. Something that could affect a lot of people. "Where do I go from here?" I asked, my voice low. "What's the next move?" "You're on your own for now," the voice said. "I've given you all I can. But you need to keep your head down. Stay off the radar. They're looking for you, and they'll do whatever it takes to find you." I could hear the finality in their voice. That was it. No more help. No more clues. I was on my own. The line went dead, and I slowly lowered the phone. My mind was racing, the weight of the situation crashing down on me. I had no idea who I was really up against, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let them get away with this. I couldn't let them hurt Maggie or anyone else. I turned around to see Maggie still sitting in the corner, her eyes trained on me, her face pale. She hadn't spoken a word, but I could tell she was waiting for me to tell her what to do next. "Maggie," I said softly, my voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in my head. "We need to get out of here. They're coming for us, but I'm not going to let them win." Maggie stood up slowly, her small frame standing tall despite the fear in her eyes. She trusted me, and that meant everything. Together, we would face whatever came next. The world outside was dangerous, but I wasn't going to let that stop us. We were in this together, and nothing was going to change that. I turned toward Maggie, her small form barely visible in the dim light of the safe house. She was sitting on the edge of the worn couch, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. She didn't say anything, but her wide eyes told me everything I needed to know. She was still scared, but there was something else too, something deeper. Maybe it was trust, maybe it was the faint flicker of hope, but whatever it was, it kept her still, waiting for me to tell her what to do next. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The weight of what we were up against pressed down on me, but I had to remain focused. For Maggie, I walked over to the small table near the window and picked up the photographs I had found earlier. The faces in those pictures, children, all of them, scared and confused, their eyes filled with a terror that made my stomach twist. Maggie's face was among them, her innocence stark against the horrors in those images. Whoever was behind this was no ordinary criminal. They were organized, ruthless, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. I could feel the fire inside me growing, the need for justice, for revenge. I couldn't let them get away with it. Not now. Not ever. I turned back to Maggie, meeting her gaze. "We're not safe here," I said softly, though I knew she already understood that. She nodded without speaking, her expression serious. She knew the danger we were in. I moved toward the door, checking the lock one last time. We had to keep moving, keep staying one step ahead of them. There was no time to waste. I had made too many promises to Maggie to let fear dictate my actions. I walked back to her, crouching down to her level. "We're going to find out who's behind this," I said firmly. "And we're going to stop them." Maggie didn't respond, but I could see the faintest flicker of determination in her eyes. I wasn't sure how much she understood, but I could tell she was ready for whatever came next. I gave her a small smile and helped her up. "Come on. We have to go." I led Maggie out of the safe house, making sure the door was locked behind us. The cold night air hit me like a punch, but I didn't flinch. There was a job to do, and I wasn't going to back down now. We slipped into the shadows, moving quickly but quietly, avoiding the main streets. I could feel the weight of every footstep, every turn we took, but I couldn't stop. The people who were after us were still out there, and they weren't going to stop until they found us. As we rounded a corner, I spotted a familiar figure in the distance, a man standing by a black car, looking around cautiously. I stopped dead in my tracks, motioning for Maggie to stay behind me. I recognized him instantly. It was one of the men I had seen earlier at the factory, the one who had been searching for the note. He was too close. If he saw us, it would all be over. I backed up, pulling Maggie with me, trying to stay out of his line of sight. We ducked into a small alleyway, and I pressed my back against the brick wall, holding my breath. The man passed by, not noticing us, but I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. That was too close. We couldn't keep doing this, constantly running, always looking over our shoulders. I had to find a way to fight back. But first, we needed to get somewhere safe. We kept moving, my mind working quickly as I thought of our next move. The streets were quiet now, almost too quiet. But I knew better than to trust the calm. We were still being hunted, and I wasn't going to take any chances. As we walked, I kept an eye on the alleyways, the side streets, any place that might offer us a little more protection. Finally, we reached a small diner on the edge of town. It was the last place anyone would think to look for us, and that was exactly why I chose it. The neon lights flickered above the entrance, casting a faint glow on the pavement. I pushed open the door, holding it for Maggie as she stepped inside. The warmth of the diner hit me immediately, and I took a deep breath, relieved to be out of the cold. I glanced around quickly, noting the few scattered patrons and the tired waitress behind the counter. It was a quiet, unassuming place, perfect for laying low. I motioned for Maggie to sit at a booth near the back, keeping my eyes on the door. "Stay here," I said. "I'll be right back." I walked up to the counter, ordering 2 coffees and a plate of fries. The waitress looked at me with a raised eyebrow but didn't ask any questions. I paid her and grabbed the food, taking it back to the booth where Maggie was sitting. She was already looking around nervously, her eyes darting to the door every few seconds. I set the food down in front of her, trying to offer a comforting smile. "We're safe for now," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. Maggie didn't respond, but I could see the tension starting to ease from her shoulders. She took a small bite of the fries, her gaze never leaving the door. I sat across from her, my mind still racing. The photos, the note, the people after us. There was so much more to this story than I had realized, and I wasn't going to stop until I had the full picture. Whoever was behind this had made a huge mistake, underestimating me, underestimating Maggie. I wasn't going to let them win. We sat in the quiet of the diner, the warm glow of the neon sign outside flickering intermittently, casting long shadows on the cracked vinyl booth we sat in. The plate of fries had barely been touched by Maggie, who was still looking around nervously, her eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing on me, every thought focused on one thing: getting Maggie to safety and stopping the people who were behind this. The coffee sat untouched, cold and forgotten, as I tried to think through our next steps. Maggie was the key to everything. She had something they wanted, something dangerous enough to make them hunt her down with everything they had. I had to protect her, but I couldn't do it alone. I needed to make contact with the right people, people who could help me track down these criminals and put an end to their operation. But right now, that wasn't an option. We were on our own. I looked at Maggie, her small frame, hunched over as she stared into the dark outside. She wasn't just scared anymore. She was becoming a fighter, learning to survive in this world of shadows. She had been through so much in such a short time, and yet she hadn't broken. It made me realize how much I had underestimated her. I couldn't help but feel a strange pride in her, a fierce protectiveness. "Maggie," I said, my voice soft but firm. She looked up at me, her wide eyes meeting mine, searching for any sign of reassurance. I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "We're going to stop them. They're not going to hurt you." She nodded, though I could see the doubt lingering in her eyes. I wasn't sure if I believed it either. The people we were up against were ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. I knew this was far from over, but we had to keep moving. The more we stayed in one place, the more dangerous it became. We couldn't afford to wait. I stood up, motioning for Maggie to do the same. She followed, the uncertainty still in her eyes, but determination starting to replace it. "We're going to head to the next place," I said, leading her toward the door. "It's not much, but it's safer than being here." We stepped out into the cold night air, the streets empty and silent. The city seemed asleep, but I knew better than to trust the calm. The danger wasn't gone, just hidden, waiting for the right moment to strike. I glanced over at Maggie, making sure she was keeping up, her small form silhouetted against the dim light of the street lamp. We walked briskly, staying close to the shadows, always watching, always listening. I could hear the faint hum of the city around us, but it was the silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we walked, my mind was already planning, calculating our next move. I needed to find out who these people were, who was running this operation, and how deep it went. The more I learned, the more I realized that this wasn't just some isolated group. It was a network, a machine with many moving parts. And Maggie? She was just one of the pieces. We reached the next location, an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a place I knew well, a place I had used before when things got too hot. It wasn't much, but it had the one thing we needed: shelter. I opened the door slowly, making sure no one was around, and ushered Maggie inside. It was dark and cold, the air thick with dust, and the smell of old wood. We moved inside, and I locked the door behind us, taking a moment to catch my breath. The silence was oppressive, and the weight of what was ahead hung heavily in the air. I turned to Maggie, who was already looking around the room, her eyes scanning for any signs of danger. I could see she was still frightened, but there was a resilience in her that hadn't been there before. She was adapting. "Stay close," I told her. "I'll keep you safe, but I need to get some answers. I can't do it alone." Maggie nodded, her eyes wide but filled with a determination that matched my own. We were in this together, and no matter what, I wasn't going to let her down. I took a deep breath, my mind working quickly. I needed to contact the people I trusted, the ones who could help us fight back. But I wasn't sure who could be trusted anymore. The people after us were everywhere, and they were always one step ahead. I had to outsmart them, and I had to do it fast. There was no time to waste. I walked over to the small desk in the corner, where I kept a burner phone, and dialed a number. It rang 3 times before someone picked up. "What's going on?" The voice on the other end asked, calm and steady. "I need your help," I said, my voice low and urgent. "We've got trouble. Big trouble. I need to know everything you can about a group of people who've been using kids. Maggie's in danger, and I'm not going to sit back and let them get away with it." There was a pause on the other end. "I can help," the voice said finally. "But you need to be careful. They're more powerful than you realize. You're going to need more than just yourself to take them down." I clenched my fists, my jaw set. "I don't care how powerful they are. I'm not stopping until this is over." The voice on the phone gave a low sigh. "Just stay smart. And stay alive." I hung up and turned to Maggie. I had made a promise, and I wasn't going to break it. The fight was just beginning, but this time, we had a chance. Together, we would bring them down. In this gripping Hell Angels story, the tale unfolds with a young girl caught in the dangerous web of a ruthless criminal network and a tough biker determined to protect her. The story dives deep into the heart of betrayal and survival as the Hell Angels stories take us on a journey filled with twists and turns. With every moment, the stakes get higher as our protagonist battles not only for his own survival, but for the safety of an innocent child. As the biker races to unravel the mystery, the tension escalates in this action-packed adventure. Every corner turned leads to new challenges, as secrets are uncovered and the biker's loyalty is tested. The Hell Angels stories showcase the grit and determination of those who refuse to back down, no matter the odds. This chilling narrative reveals the lengths one will go to protect the vulnerable, blending intense action with heart-pounding suspense. Get ready to experience the world of the Hell Angels like never before, as the story unfolds and brings you deeper into the world of crime, danger, and loyalty. The biker's journey to uncover the truth behind the hidden crime will leave you at the edge of your seat, eager to see what comes next. The Hell Angels stories continue to captivate, drawing you into a world where trust is rare and danger is always lurking around the corner.